Welcome and hello. This is a video tutorial on HEC HMS, and in this lesson, I'm going to talk about hydrologic elements. All right, so what we have on the screen here is HMS. I've created a project, and now I'm going to go up and create a basin. So create component, basin model. I'll just call this basin 1. Now that we have a basin created over here in the Watershed Explorer, I'm going to add different hydrologic elements, which are the basic building blocks of the basin, to this basin 1. Along the top, I have some buttons here in this components toolbar that allows me to add components to the basin. So we have the subbasin, reach tool, reservoir, junction, diversion, source, and sink. These are the 7 hydrologic elements that we can add to our basin. If you don't see these buttons, then just go up to View, Toolbars, and then click this Components, add a checkbox to that. And that's also how you remove the toolbar as well. So I'm going to go View, Toolbars, Components, and then those are my components for adding hydrologic elements. All right, let's go ahead and just talk about each of the elements briefly. Then we'll add them to the map. And also, I want to discuss some of the options tab when editing these elements. We're not going to talk about everything there is to talk about for these elements. Then this is really just more of an introduction and an overview. All right, so first is the sub-basin element. And the sub-basins are the catchment area where rainfall is converted to runoff. The next one over is a reach tool. Reaches model the movement of water through a river or a channel. Next is the reservoir tool. The reservoirs simulate the storage and release of water, controlling downstream flow based on storage and their output characteristics. The next one over is the junction tool. Junctions are confluence points where multiple streams converge together. And the next tool is over is the diversion tool. Diversions divert flow from a stream or river into a different path. And then the next one is a source creation tool. Sources introduce flow into the system. And the last one is a sink, and sinks remove flow out of a system. To add any of these hydrologic elements to our map, just go ahead and click. I'll click on subbasin and then a single left click on the map. I'm going to call this subbasin 1. You can add a description if you want and create. Here is my subbasin 1. I'll go ahead and click again. I'll call this subbasin 2 and then create. I'm going to just go ahead and create an element of each type for a good measure here. So this is the reach tool. For the reach tool, it takes 2 clicks. The first click will be upstream. Click again at the downstream end. And then I'm going to call that reach 1. Next is a reservoir. So I'll just call that reservoir 1. As you may notice, over in the Watershed Explorer, I'm now accumulating my different watershed elements. Next up is the junction tool. So I'll just click that, call it junction 1 and create. You probably wouldn't have a watershed that looks like this. I'm just throwing all the elements onto the page for the sake of discussion. Here is the diversion 1. And then here's a source 1. And the last one is a sink 1. Okay. Next, I'm going to select the arrow pointer tool here at the top, and that allows me to select individual hydrologic elements, or if I on the map, or if I hold down the control key, I can select multiple elements at the same time. And if I do that, you notice over in the Watershed Explorer, it's selecting the same elements that I selected on the map. I can click off to the side to unselect all, or click Edit, Clear Selection. Also, I can make selections over in the Watershed Editor, and that particular element is highlighted on the map. Here's subbasin 1, subbasin 2. If I want to select multiple, I can do that as well. Hold down the control key and then just go ahead and start making selections. So I've selected the subbasin 1 and 2, reach 1, and reservoir 1. Okay. If I want to make a copy of any of these elements, I can just select the element like subbasin 2, right click, and I'm sorry, I need to make the copy over in the Watershed Explorer. There's copy, and then come over here to the map, right click, paste element. So let me zoom out here That new element is right down here, subbasin 1. So I'm going to actually rename that. Right click, rename subbasin 3. Okay. And then I'm going to actually move that up to the top to be with the other subbasins. Move up. Up. Okay. And as you notice, I can expand the subbasins or the reach to show some extra information. I'm not going to talk about everything there is to talk about, but we will explore the options tab in just a little bit. One other way to select hydrologic elements is to go up to View and then select all. Another way is to clear selection. So I have to select the record first and then edit, select upstream. I don't have anything upstream because nothing's really connected yet, but we'll do that in a later lesson. And then select inversion. So if I have, say, just my subbasins selected and I want to select everything except those three subbasins, I can go up to View, Edit, and then invert the selection. And now, as I mentioned, everything except those three subbasins are selected. And I can do that again to select the three subbasins, Edit, invert selection. All right. The last way to select is to you go edit, select by name. So what I'm going to do is unselect all. So I'll go edit, clear selection. Now what I can do is select the element by the name and the type, and then the selection would either replace or add or select from current selection. So if you have a watershed with or a basin with tons of different hydrologic elements, then this may be the easiest way to locate the elements you're looking for. For instance, if I wanted to just select all the sub basins, I could just use the checkboxes and then leave this as an asterisk, which is a wildcard in the name. So that just basically says, give me all the sub basins. And if I click apply, you see the three sub basins were selected. If I want to add to that all the reservoirs, then I can just click add and reservoirs, and then I click apply. And now the one reservoir I have in the basin has been added. But if I say replace current selection in reservoirs, it's only going to select the reservoirs and remove those three subbasins. All right, so that's how that works. Um, Also, the name, let's go ahead and select all the types here. If I wanted to select all the hydrologic elements that have a name that start with the letter S, I could go S and then star for asterisk and then click apply, and it selected the three subbasins, the source, and the sink. And if I select, replace is my option here, and then change the S to an R, this would just select the elements that begin with R, which is reach and reservoir. See how that works? If I wanted to select all the elements that include the letter A, I could do star A star and then apply. So that's what we got there. That makes sense. So anyway, lots of different options for selecting the hydraulic elements based on the name, the type, and so on. One last way to find your hydrologic elements is to go up to parameters and then element inventory. And it shows you, well, right now it's only the selected elements, but here's all the elements right here. So you can select the elements, open up this box, just get the selected elements, or view all the elements by selecting all elements in this table. The last part of this lesson, I want to talk about the options tab here. So if you select a hydrologic element like subbasin 1, you notice that down here in the component editor, we have different subtabs like subbasin, loss, transform, base flow, and options. For a reach, we have a reach tab and then routing and options. For a reservoir tab, we have reservoir and options. So for each of these hydrologic element types, it will have the first subtab is the name of that type with properties specific to that type. But they all also have this options tab, which are optional features. And I want to talk about some of these options in the remainder of this video, and then leave some of the details that are specific to each hydrologic type to a later lesson. All right, so if you go ahead and we'll select subbasin 1, for instance, and then select options. Now we're seeing a few different elements here. Of course, the name and the basin name, but then we also have observed flow. This is a time series data set. that can be loaded up to represent the observed flow at the outlet to this particular hydrologic element. So for a subbasin, that would represent the outlet location of that subbasin. We would have observed flow. And same is true with observed stage. So if you have observed stage data, that would represent the observed stage from that subbasin's outlet location. For a reach, we again have an options tab and we have observed flow and observed stage. So for a reach, that would represent the flow out of the reach or the downstream end of the reach. Not the middle of the reach, not the upstream end, but the downstream end. And same is true with the observed stage. It would represent the downstream stage. Here at reservoir is maybe a little bit different because it's called tailwater stage and observed outflow. And then for a junction, here's the options tab, observed flow, observed stage, diversion, same thing, options tab, observed flow, observed stage. You're also noticing a stage discharge field here, and this would be a paired data set. So by default, HMS will calculate the flow during a compute simulation, but it may not actually compute the stage. However, if the hydrologic element has a stage discharge curve, it will calculate that stage for that particular element, and then that time series data will be saved with the other output data. So we're seeing a stage discharge here associated with the diversion hydrologic element, as well as here at the junction, as well as at the subbasin stage discharge. So that's the purpose of that field. There's also a reference flow that can be added to represent any flow. So that's at the very bottom here. You see reference flow in CFS and then a reference label, which is a label for that particular reference flow. The units here are in CFS, but if I go up to basin and I change the units to metric and then save and then click on subbasin options, now that reference flow is in cubic meters per second. So just keep mindful that the units are based on the basin. This base flow, reference flow, doesn't have to be a base flow, like I just said. It's any reference flow. It could be a base flow, and then you'd reference it base flow. It could be a 100-year storm, in which case you may want to reference 100-year storm down in the label to remember what it is. It could be some sort of drought related flow. So just keep in mind that it doesn't have to be a base flow. And this reference flow would appear on some of the output data, like plots or tables. So you could use that for comparison. One particular field that's unique to subbasin is this SWE. Observed SWE represents the snow water equivalent because certain basins could have snow and snowpack, and that is unique to a basin hydrologic element and needs to be added to the model. And then the last one is the flow ratio. Flow ratio is for the subbasin and the source hydrologic element types, but you're not seeing it here because I have to toggle it on at the basin level. So I'll go up to basin, I'll say flow ratio yes, save, and now I'll select subbasin options, and now we see this flow ratio right here. Flow ratio allows us to change the quantity of flow with a reference of 1.0 for the subbasin and for the source. Oops. Yeah, make sure you click on the components tab, source, options tab, and then here's the flow ratio. So the default is 1.0. If you leave it blank, it'll be unchanged, but you can increase it or decrease it based on your preference for that particular hydrologic element. All right, well, that was it for this video on hydrologic elements in HEC HMS. We talked about the different types of hydrologic elements, adding them, editing them, selecting them, as well as discussing the different properties down here in the component editor for each of the different hydrologic elements.